Savannah, Georgia, a city where the past never truly leaves, where Spanish moss hangs from trees like broken clocks on branches, and the shadows of the past roam freely. In one of those neighborhoods full of old homes with peeling paint and creaky porches, 23-year-old Ashley Moore moved in 2019. An art student at the Savannah College of Art and Design, she was searching for solitude, inspiration, and, as she would later say, a touch of Gothic romance. What she got was far more than she ever expected. The apartment was on the second floor of an old two-story house, built, according to the landlord, back in the 1880s. The house stood on a quiet, sun-drenched street, yet even on the brightest day, the second-floor windows always seemed slightly dimmed. Ashley fell in love with the space at first sight. High ceilings, arched windows, antique doorknobs, and a long-defunct fireplace. The landlord, a quiet man in his 50s, gave only one dry warning. The noises at night are just old wiring and creaky boards from the damp. Don't let it scare you. She smiled, assuming it was part of the home's old-fashioned charm. The first few days were peaceful. Ashley unpacked boxes, hung up paintings, and settled into the comfort of being alone. But on the fourth night, something changed. Around 3 a.m, she was woken by a knock, steady, deliberate, like someone tapping their knuckles on the hallway floor outside her bedroom. She got up, thinking it might be a downstairs neighbor, but then she remembered. The downstairs unit was vacant. Both the landlord and the woman across the street had mentioned it. She stepped into the hallway, and the knocking stopped. The silence was thick, as if the house was holding its breath. The next night, she heard footsteps, slow, barefoot ones, moving across the wooden floor. First in the bedroom, then in the kitchen. Her heart raced, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. She told herself it had to be a dream, or maybe her own steps echoing back at her. She convinced herself. But after that night, the sounds became constant. Knocking, footsteps, a faint dragging, like someone running a hand along the wall. Sometimes she'd wake up with the feeling that someone had been standing beside her bed. Once, she was almost sure she saw a dark figure in the doorway of her bedroom. Tall, still, a silhouette without features. But when she turned on the light, it vanished. 2 weeks in, things started getting stranger. Her towels were always found on the bathroom floor each morning, even though she knew she hung them neatly. Once, she found her paintbrushes in the refrigerator, her phone in the empty bathroom sink. Another time, after returning from college, she found every cabinet in the kitchen wide open. No one could have entered. Doors and windows were locked, with no sign of tampering. An elderly woman across the street, Mrs. Daines, noticed Ashley looking more and more exhausted. One afternoon, as Ashley was struggling with grocery bags, Daines stepped outside and quietly asked, "Are you in the Legrand apartment?" Ashley nodded. "I lived across the street when I was a girl. That place always had its oddities. My mother told me that back in 1924, a woman fell down the stairs and died. Ever since then, the second floor, it gets noisy, especially when the house is empty. And now it seems it doesn't want to be alone." Ashley chuckled nervously, but that night, for the first time, she woke up from a cold that didn't come from the windows, but from the bed itself. The blanket had been pulled to the floor, and at the foot of the bed stood something, a shadow blacker than the darkness around it. It had no face, but Ashley could feel its gaze. She screamed, turned on the light, and it vanished. She began keeping a journal, not just writing down the events, but drawing them. Graphite sketches of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her features always blurred. In each drawing, the woman stood by the staircase, or the bedroom door, or outside the window. In one of the sketches, her eyes were deep black voids. Ashley didn't remember drawing them that way. The breaking point came in late November. She woke to a terrible creaking sound. Turning her head, she saw the bedroom door slowly open on its own. A shadow slipped into the room. Ashley couldn't scream. Her throat felt crushed. She sensed the mattress sinking beside her. Something lay down. The blanket slowly pulled up, as if someone was tucking themselves in. And only then, with a desperate surge of will, she broke free of the paralysis, jumped up, grabbed her keys, and ran barefoot into the night, still in her pajamas. She never went back. A few days later, hired movers retrieved her things. One of them, a man in his 30s, refused to go upstairs after hearing footsteps above him. The apartment was empty. Ashley now lives in Atlanta and doesn't like to talk about the house. She throws away any mail that includes her old address. But sometimes she dreams of that staircase, creaking beneath someone else's feet, and wakes clutching her pillow tight, as if something is still trying to lie down beside her. Los Angeles, California. Just 20 minutes from downtown, in the old neighborhood of Glassell Park, 1940s houses stand side by side like silent witnesses of the past. It was in one of these that a young couple, Josh and Claire Roberts, moved in April 2021. They were both 28. He was an assistant director working on TV series. She was a remote graphic designer with a quiet voice and a love for old houses that, as she said, have a soul. The house they rented was surprisingly cheap for the area. The landlord was eager to rent it out. He even lowered the price, urging the couple to move in as soon as possible. Josh and Claire didn't think much of it. The house looked charming. Faded lemon-colored facade, carved wooden trim, stone steps, and a vintage mailbox. 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, a tiny backyard, and, as they were told, a basement, though it had long been sealed and was no longer in use. They moved in mid-spring. At first, everything felt normal. Boxes, unpacking, furniture, the smell of paint and dust. The first few nights were uneventful, aside from the usual unfamiliar sounds, old pipes creaking, the floor groaning. But on the 4th night, Claire said she smelled ashes in the bedroom. Josh didn't notice anything and blamed it on city dust or maybe a neighbor's fireplace. The next morning, Claire found a strange mark on the wall, like someone had pressed a hand against the plaster. The fingers were unusually long, and inside the palm, the wall had blackened as if scorched. She didn't think much of it. It was just paint reacting oddly. But when more of these marks started appearing, 2 on the ceiling, 1 on the door, she began photographing them. In the photos, the prints looked even more vivid than in real life, as if they became clearer on film. That's when the scratching noises began, at night, in the walls and under the floor, especially near the back bedroom, which they used as a home office. The sounds weren't rodents or pipes. They were too rhythmic, like someone was tracing fingers along the plaster for the inside. Claire started waking up at 3:33 a.m. every night. At first, she thought it was the heat or just restlessness. But then the dreams began. Always the same. She stood in the hallway, cracks forming along the walls. Black dust seeped from them, and from the dust, hands emerged, palms scratching the air, etching symbols she couldn't read. Every time she tried to approach, she woke up in a cold sweat. 3 weeks in, Claire insisted they moved the bed. She felt like someone invisible was standing in the corner of the bedroom. Josh laughed it off, said she was just anxious from the change in environment. But when he started seeing something odd in the bathroom mirror, a blurred figure near the door, something not in the room, he stopped joking. Especially after watching a video he filmed one morning. The reflection in the mirror blinked, but he didn't. One evening, Josh came home from set and found Claire in the walk-in closet. She stood perfectly still, facing the wall, mumbling something unintelligible. When he called her name, she flinched and turned suddenly. Her eyes were glassy, her skin paler than usual. She didn't remember any of it. Said she must have dozed off, but after that, she barely slept at all. She sat in the kitchen at night, scribbling her dreams in a notebook, drawing symbols she'd never seen before. Josh tried looking them up online. One of them turned out to be a sigil used in coal dust summoning rituals, an old occult tradition from mining towns in Pennsylvania. Then, in June, the most terrifying thing happened. That night, the power in the house suddenly went out. There were no outages in the area, just in their home. They lit candles and stayed in the kitchen. Claire suddenly said, "He's standing in the wall again." Josh turned, and the back wall, above the dining table, started to darken. From cracks, black dust began to seep out, rising into the air, making it thick, like before a fire. Then came the creaking, not the groan of an old house, but the sound of wood being torn from within. And in the wall, a face began to emerge. It wasn't fully formed, like it was wrapped in fabric, but there were hollows where the eyes should be, and an open mouth. It was whispering, soundlessly. But Claire's nose started bleeding. She screamed and collapsed. Josh grabbed her and dragged her outside. They never went back in. When they told the police, not for the first time, by the way, they were simply advised to move and see a psychologist. The house went back up for rent, again, at a reduced price. The couple later found posts from former tenants on an old Reddit forum. Complaints about headaches, paranoia, hallucinations, and dust that gets under your skin. No one had lasted more than 2 months. Now the house stands vacant, windows boarded up, and when Josh once returned with a local blog journalist, the man noticed a faint inscription showing through the fresh. Billings, Montana. A small but lively city, surrounded by plains and rolling hills, with old neighborhoods still home to houses from the early 20th century. It was in one of those neighborhoods that 35-year-old Nick Foster moved in early December 2022. An electrician, recently divorced, Nick was looking to start fresh after a few rough years in Seattle. Renting an apartment on the 3rd floor of a red brick building built in 1911 seemed like the perfect choice. Affordable, close to downtown, and, most importantly, quiet. But from the very first day, Nick felt that something about the apartment was off. He wasn't superstitious. He worked with wiring. He knew how old transformers hummed, how panels creaked, how winter air could twist wood. But this was different. The apartment was filled with a dense, almost sticky silence. Even when the neighbors made noise, the sound seemed to die just outside his door. On the third night, he heard loud thuds, as if someone downstairs was dropping heavy books. He went down, but the place was empty. The tenants in the other 2 units were asleep, and the basement door was locked. Heading back upstairs, he noticed an old tag hanging on his doorknob, scratched with the words, "Do not enter." He tore it off and dismissed it as someone's weird joke, but the apartment grew more unsettling each night. He started waking up at 2:47 a.m. every single night. At first, just from the cold, then from footsteps, someone walking the hallway, back and forth, soft, heavy, bare feet moving slowly. At first, Nick assumed it was a neighbor, but when he stepped into the hall, he saw the lights flickering and no one there. He started leaving his phone recording overnight, and one morning, listening back, he heard whispering. A man's voice, muffled, as if coming from behind the wall. "You're not alone. You've never been alone." There was no one in the video, but at one point, the camera focused on the hallway mirror, and for a split second, a silhouette. A black, indistinct figure standing behind him while he slept, then gone. He began noticing things moving. First, his keys, then his tools. He once found a wrench in the freezer. Another night, he woke up to loud banging, only to find all the kitchen drawers pulled open. On the floor, dry cereal poured in a perfect circle. He asked the landlord about it, but the man just shrugged. "You're not the first to complain. There was a woman before you. Clara. Said voices were calling her at night. Said they screamed from under the floor. Then she disappeared. Her relatives picked up her stuff, but she never officially moved out. Just vanished." Nick tried to ignore it, threw himself into work, stayed out late, but things only got worse. He started seeing strange shadows. Corners looked deeper than they should have. One night, while watching TV, he saw in the dark reflection of the screen someone standing behind the couch. He turned quickly. Nothing there. After a month, he began hearing his name whispered. First, in the bathroom, then in the bedroom, then from inside the wall, where there was no adjoining unit. He tore open the drywall. Behind it, an old sealed fireplace. Inside, ashes and a scrap of fabric embroidered with his address and initials. KW. He started dreaming of a woman in a white robe, bruises under her eyes. She'd stand motionless in the corner, never moving until he tried to approach. Then she'd rush toward him, mouth wide open, but making no sound. Every time he woke up crying, hands frozen stiff. One night, he tried to write it all down in a journal, by hand. But as soon as he wrote the line, "I think this might actually be real," the pen flew from his hand and slapped him across the cheek. He froze. The air became thick, unbreathable. From the kitchen came the slow, scraping sound of something being etched into the floor. He ran, just stood up and left, took nothing, left his clothes, tools, even his passport behind. He returned only a week later with 2 friends in daylight. The apartment smelled like smoke, and on the wall above the bed was a long, clawed scratch, as if something had tried to escape or crawl in. Now Nick lives in another city and says he still hears footsteps, even in hotels, even in brand new buildings. He's convinced that whatever was in that apartment followed him. He doesn't keep mirrors, doesn't display photos, and in every corner of his new home, there's a lamp burning all night long. The apartment was in an old brick building constructed in 1915. The building was cozy, with vintage ceiling moldings, cast-iron radiators, and wooden windows that creaked at the slightest breeze. Emily rented one of the units on the second floor, a bright two-room apartment with a view of the autumn park. The neighbors were polite, though not particularly talkative. She only met one, an elderly woman downstairs, Mrs. Carlson, who smiled politely and said, "If you hear music at night, don't be alarmed. A pianist used to live here." The words sounded strange, but Emily didn't think much of them. The first week passed quietly, though around 1 in the morning, faint sounds began to drift through the wall that separated her bedroom from the neighboring unit, which at the time was unoccupied. It sounded like someone was gently pressing piano keys, very softly and beautifully. The melody had a sorrowful tone, and something familiar about it. Emily even found it soothing in a way. But the music always began at the exact same time, 12:41 a.m., and lasted for about 15 minutes. One day, she decided to thank the neighbor for the lovely night serenade. But to her surprise, the landlady told her that the apartment next door was empty. Had been for 6 months. The owner had even removed the door to start renovations, but never got around to finishing. Emily didn't believe it. That night, she set an alarm for 12:40, got up, walked to the wall, and listened. The music started at exactly 12:41. The same melody. Clear, as if played live on an acoustic piano. Emily even recorded it. The next morning, she sent the clip to a friend, a professional pianist, and asked if she recognized the piece. A couple of hours later, the reply came, "This is really weird. It's not a known piece. Sounds like something original, very old. And at the end, did you hear a voice? Someone is singing." Emily listened again. Yes, at the very end. There was a whisper, a woman's voice, barely audible, something like, "Don't go. I'm still playing." A chill ran through her. She fled the bedroom and slept on the couch that night. After that, she began hearing the music not just at night, but also during the day whenever she came home. Sometimes from the bathroom, sometimes from under the floor. With each passing night, the melody grew louder, and it began to change. Sharp, aggressive notes were added, as if someone was pounding on the keys in a fit of rage. One night, she finally peeked into the neighboring apartment. The door was indeed gone. The room was completely empty, peeling walls, dust, warped floorboards. But in the far corner stood a piano bench. The instrument itself was missing, but the air smelled of varnish and old wood, and there was a faint trail of dust leading from the bench to the wall, the very wall behind her bedroom. She quickly shut the door, returned to her apartment, and the next morning, she found fingerprints on her mirror, thin, elegant ones, like those of a pianist. But they were too high, higher than she could reach. Then the dreams started. She saw a woman in a long gray dress from the early 20th century, her dark hair falling over her face. She sat at a piano in a pitch-black room, playing that same melody again. But each night, the woman's face became more distorted. By the third night, she had no eyes, just empty, glistening sockets. Emily went back to the landlady, who hesitated, then admitted that in the 1960s, the apartment had belonged to a well-known pianist named Vivian Marlowe. One night, she vanished, in the middle of the night. The apartment was found with the piano flipped over and footprints leading into the wall. Her body was never found. After that, several tenants reported hearing the music. One of them took his own life, leaving behind a note. I tried not to listen, but now she plays inside my head. Emily began hearing the music constantly. Even when she left the apartment, even at work, the melody played directly in her ears. She had her hearing checked. Got an MRI. Everything came back normal, but the music grew louder. Sometimes it was accompanied by voices. On the night of Halloween, she woke up to the sound of every piano key being struck at once. When she opened her eyes, musical notes were carved into her ceiling, scratched in, right above her bed, and the air reeked of dust and varnish. The last night she spent in that apartment, Emily got up at 12:41 and walked into the neighboring empty room. But this time, the piano was there, old, with cracked keys covered in ash. Vivian was sitting at it. This time, she turned her head, and in her empty eye sockets, darkness pulsed. "Play with me," she whispered. Emily screamed and fled. She never returned. She rented a room in a local college dorm, gave up her belongings, stopped drawing. Every time she picked up a pencil, she found herself sketching musical notes. Always the same ones.